Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wajenberg. This time we're going to continue our reading of Lilith by George MacDonald. The narrator of Lilith, Mr. Vane, is exploring a strange country and has come to the castle or the palace of a very strange princess, very beautiful, but not to be trusted. Chapter 26, A Battle Royal. I threw myself on the bed and began to turn over in my mind the tale she had told me. She had forgotten herself, and by a single incautious word removed one perplexity as to the condition in which I found her in the forest. The leopardess bounded over. The princess lay prostrate on the bank. The running stream had dissolved her self-enchantment. Her own account of the object of her journey revealed the danger of the little ones then imminent. I had saved the life of their one fearful enemy. I had but reached this conclusion when I fell asleep. The lovely wine may not have been quite innocent. When I opened my eyes, it was night. A lamp suspended from the ceiling cast a clear, although soft light through the chamber. A delicious languor enfolded me. I seemed floating far from land upon the bosom of a twilit sea. Existence was in itself pleasure. I had no pain. Surely I was dying. No pain? Ah, what a shoot of mortal pain was that! What a sickening sting! It went right through my heart. Again, that was sharpness itself, and so sickening. I could not move my hand to lay it on my heart. Something kept it down. The pain was dying away, but my whole body seemed paralyzed. Some evil thing was upon me, something hateful. I would have struggled, but could not reach a struggle. My will agonized, but in vain to assert itself. I desisted and lay passive. Then I became aware of a soft hand on my face, pressing my head into the pillow, and of a heavy weight lying across me. I began to breathe more freely. The weight was gone from my chest. I opened my eyes. The princess was standing above me on the bed, looking out into the room with the air of one who dreamed. Her great eyes were clear and calm. Her mouth wore a look of satisfied passion. She wiped from it a streak of red. She caught my gaze, bent down, and struck me on the eyes with the handkerchief in her hand. It was like drawing the edge of a knife across them, and for a moment or two I was blind. I heard a dull, heavy sound as of a large, soft-footed animal alighting from a little jump. I opened my eyes and saw the great swing of a long tail as it disappeared through the half-open doorway. I sprang after it. The creature had vanished. I shot down the stair and into the hall of alabaster. The moon was high, and the place like the inside of a faint sun-blanched moon. The princess was not there. I must find her. In her presence I might protect myself. Out of it I could not. I was a tame animal for her to feed upon, a human fountain for a thirst demoniac. She showed me favor the more easily to use me. My waking eyes did not fear her, but they would close, and she would come. Not seeing her, I felt her everywhere, for she might be anywhere, might even now be waiting me in some secret cavern of sleep. Only with my eyes upon her could I feel safe from her. Outside the alabaster hall it was pitch dark, and I had to grope my way along with hands and feet. At last I felt a curtain, put it aside, and entered the black hall. There I found a great silent assembly. How it was visible I neither saw nor could imagine, for the walls, the floor, the roof were shrouded in what seemed an infinite blackness, blacker than the blackest of moonless, starless nights. Yet my eyes could separate, although vaguely, not a few of the individuals in the mass interpenetrated and divided, as well as surrounded by the darkness. It seemed as if my eyes would never come quite to themselves. I pressed their balls and looked again, but what I saw would not grow distinct. Blackness mingled with form, silence, and undefined motion possessed the wide space. All was a dim, confused dance, filled with recurrent glimpses of shapes not unknown to me. Now appeared a woman with glorious eyes looking out of a skull, now an armed figure on a skeleton horse, now one, now another of the hideous burrowing phantasms. I could trace no order and little relation in the mingling and crossing currents and eddies. If I seemed to catch the shape and rhythm of a dance, it was but to see it break and confusion prevail. With the shifting colors of the seemingly more solid shapes mingled a multitude of shadows, independent apparently of originals, each moving after its own free shadow will. I looked everywhere for the princess, but throughout the wildly changing kaleidoscopic scene could see not her nor discover indication of her presence. Where was she? What might she not be doing? No one took the least notice of me as I wandered hither and thither, seeking her. At length, losing hope, I turned away to look elsewhere. Finding the wall, and keeping to it with my hand, for even then I could not see it, I came groping along to a curtained opening in the vestibule. Dimly moonlighted, the cage of the leopardess was the arena of what seemed a desperate though silent struggle. Two vastly different forms, human and bestial, with entangled confusion of mingling bodies and limbs, writhed and wrestled in closest embrace. It had lasted but an instant when I saw the leopardess out of the cage, walking quietly to the door. As I hastened after her, I threw a glance behind me. There was the leopardess in the cage, couching motionless as when I saw her first. The moon, halfway up the sky, was shining round and clear. The bodiless shadow I had seen the night before was walking through the trees toward the gate, and after him went the leopardess, swinging her tail. I followed a little way off, as silently as they, and neither of them once looked round. Through the open gate we went down to the city, lying quiet as the moon shone upon it. The face of the moon was very still, and its stillness looked like that of expectation. The shadow took his way straight to the stair at the top of which I had lain the night before. Without a pause he went up, and the leopardess followed. I quickened my pace, but a moment after heard a cry of horror. Then came the fall of something soft and heavy between me and the stair, and at my feet lay a body, frightfully blackened and crushed, but still recognizable as that of the woman who had led me home and shut me out. As I stood petrified, the spotted leopardess came bounding down the stair with a baby in her mouth. I darted to seize her ere she could turn at the foot, but that instant, from behind me, the white leopardess, like a great bar of glowing silver, shot through the moonlight and had her by the neck. She dropped the child. I caught it up and stood to watch the battle between them. What a sight it was, now the one, now the other uppermost, both too intent for any noise beyond a low growl, a whimpered cry, or a snarl of hate, followed by a quicker scrambling of claws as each, worrying and pushing and dragging, struggled for foothold on the pavement. The spotted leopardess was larger than the white, and I was anxious for my friend, but I soon saw that though neither stronger nor more active, the white leopardess had the greater endurance. Not once did she lose her hold on the neck of the other. From the spotted throat at length issued a howl of agony, changing by swift crowded gradations into a long-drawn crescendo of a woman's uttermost wail. The white one relaxed her jaws. The spotted one drew herself away and rose on her hind legs. Erect in the moonlight stood the princess, a confused rush of shadows careering over her whiteness, the spots of the leopard crowding, hurrying, fleeing to the refuge of her eyes, where merging they vanished. The last few, outsped and belated, mingled with the cloud of her steamy hair, leaving her radiant as the moon when a legion of little vapors had flown wind-hunted off her silvery disk, save that, adown the white column of her throat, a thread of blood still trickled from every wound of her adversary's terrible teeth. She turned away, took a few steps with the gait of a Hecate, fell, covered afresh with her spots, and fled at a long, stretching gallop. The white leopardess turned also, sprang upon me, pulled my arms asunder, caught the baby as it fell, and flew with it along the street toward the gate. Chapter 27. The Silent Fountain. I turned and followed the spotted leopardess, catching but one glimpse of her as she tore up the brow of the hill to the gate of the palace. When I reached the entrance hall, the princess was just throwing the robe around her which she had left on the floor. The blood had ceased to flow from her wounds and had dried in the wind of her flight. When she saw me, a flash of anger crossed her face, and she turned her head aside. Then, with an attempted smile, she looked at me and said, "I have met with a small accident. Happening to hear that the Catwoman was again in the city, I went down to send her away. But she had one of her horrid creatures with her. It sprang upon me and had its claws in my neck before I could strike it." She gave a shiver, and I could not help pitying her, although I knew she lied, for her wounds were real, and her face reminded me of how she looked in the cave. My heart began to reproach me that I had let her fight unaided, and I supposed I looked the compassion I felt. "Child of folly," she said with another attempted smile, "not crying, surely. Wait for me here. I am going into the black hall for a moment. I want you to get me something for my scratches." But I followed her close. Out of my sight, I feared her. The instant the princess entered, I heard a buzzing sound as of many low voices, and one portion after another the assembly began to be shiftingly illuminated, as by a ray that went traveling from spot to spot. Group after group would shine out for a space, then sink back into the general vagueness, while another part of the vast company would grow momentarily bright. Some of the actions going on when thus illuminated were not unknown to me. I had been in them, or had looked on them, and so had the princess. Present with every one of them, I now saw her. The skull-headed dancers footed the grass in the forest hall. There was the princess looking in at the door. The fight went on in the evil wood. There was the princess urging it. Yet I was close behind her all the time, she standing motionless, her head sunk on her bosom. The confused murmur continued, the confused commotion of colors and shapes, and still the ray went shifting and showing. It settled at last on the hollow in the heath, and there was the princess walking up and down and trying in vain to wrap the vapor around her. Then first I was startled at what I saw. The old librarian walked up to her, and stood for a moment regarding her. She fell. Her limbs forsook her and fled. Her body vanished. A wild shriek ran through the echoing place, and with the fall of her eidolon, the princess herself, till then standing like a statue in front of me, fell heavily and lay still. I turned at once and went out. Not again would I seek to restore her. As I stood trembling beside the cage, I knew that in the black ellipsoid I had been in the brain of the princess. I saw the tail of the leopardess quiver once. While still endeavoring to compose myself, I heard the voice of the princess beside me. "Come now," she said, "I will show you what I want you to do for me." She led the way into the court. I followed in dazed compliance. The moon was near the zenith, and her present silver seemed brighter than the gold of the absent sun. She brought me through the trees to the tallest of them, the one in the center. It was not quite like the rest, for its branches, drawing their ends together at the top, made a clump that looked from beneath like a fir cone. The princess stood close under it, gazing up, and said, as if talking to herself, "On the summit of that tree grows a tiny blossom which would at once heal my scratches. I might be a dove for a moment and fetch it, but I see a little snake in the leaves, whose bite would be worse to a dove than the bite of a tiger to me. How I hate that Catwoman." She turned to me quickly, saying with one of her sweetest smiles, "Can you climb?" The smile vanished with the brief question, and her face changed to a look of sadness and suffering. I ought to have left her to suffer, but the way she put her hand to her wounded neck went to my heart. I considered the tree. All the way up to the branches were projections on the stem like the remnants on a palm of its fallen leaves. "I can climb that tree," I answered. "Not with bare feet," she returned. In my haste to follow the leopardess disappearing, I had left my sandals in the room. "It is no matter," I said. "I have long gone barefoot." Again I looked at the tree, and my eyes went wandering up the stem until my sight lost itself in the branches. The moon shone like silver foam here and there on the rugged bole, and a little rush of wind went through the top with a murmurous sound as of water falling softly into water. I approached the tree to begin my ascent of it. The princess stopped me. "I cannot let you attempt it with your feet bare," she insisted. "A fall from the top would kill you." "So would the bite from the snake," I answered, not believing, I confess, that there was a snake. "It would not hurt you," she replied. "Wait a moment." She tore from her garment the two wide borders that met in the front, and kneeling on one knee, made me first put my left foot, then my right on the other, and bound them about with the thick embroidered strips. "You have left the threads hanging, princess," I said. "I have nothing to cut them off with, but they are not long enough to get entangled," she replied. I turned to the tree and began to climb. Now in Bulica the cold after sundown was not so great as in certain other parts of the country, especially about the sexton's cottage. Yet when I had climbed a little way, I began to feel very cold, grew still colder as I ascended, and became coldest of all when I got among the branches. Then I shivered, and seemed to have lost my hands and feet. There was hardly any wind, and the branches did not sway in the least, yet as I approached the summit I became aware of a peculiar unsteadiness. Every branch on which I placed foot or laid hold seemed on the point of giving way. When my head rose above the branches near the top, and in the open moonlight, I began to look about for the blossom. That instant I found myself drenched from head to foot. The next, as if plunged in a stormy water, I was flung about wildly, and felt myself sinking. Tossed up and down, tossed this way and tossed that, rolled over and over, checked, rolled the other way, and tossed up again, I was sinking lower and lower. Gasping and gurgling and choking, I fell at last upon a solid bottom. "I told you so," croaked a voice in my ear. Chapter 28. I am silenced. I scrubbed the water out of my eyes and saw the raven on the edge of a huge stone basin. With the cold light of the dawn reflecting from his glossy plumage, he stood calmly looking down upon me. I lay on my back in water, above which, leaning on my elbows, I just lifted my face. I was in the basin of the large fountain constructed by my father in the middle of the lawn. High over me glimmered the thick, steel-shiny stalk, shooting with a torrent uprush 100 feet into the air to spread in a blossom of foam. Nettled at the coolness of the raven's remark, "You told me nothing," I said. "I told you to do nothing anyone you distrusted asked you." "Tut, how is a mortal to remember that?" "You will not forget the consequences of having forgotten it," replied Mr. Raven, who stood leaning over the margin of the basin and stretched his hand across to me. I took it and was immediately beside him on the lawn, dripping and streaming. "You must change your clothes at once," he said. "A wetting does not signify where you came from, though at present such an accident is unusual. Here it has its inconveniences." He was again a raven, walking, with something stately in his step, toward the house, the door of which stood open. "I have not much to change," I laughed, for I had flung aside my robe to climb the tree. "It is a long time since I molted a feather," said the raven. In the house no one seemed awake. I went to my room, found a dressing-gown, and descended to the library. As I entered, the librarian came from the closet. I threw myself on a couch. Mr. Raven drew a chair to my side and sat down. For a minute or two neither spoke. I was the first to break silence. "What does it all mean?" I said. "A good question," he rejoined. "Nobody knows what anything is. A man can only learn what a thing means. Whether he do depends on the use he is making of it." "I have made no use of anything yet." "Not much, but you know the fact, and that is something. Most people take more than a lifetime to learn they have learned nothing and done less. At least you have not been without the desire to be of use." "I did want to do something for the children, the precious little ones, I mean." "I know you did, and started the wrong way." "I did not know the right way." "That is true also, but you are to blame that you did not." "I'm ready to believe whatever you tell me, as soon as I understand what it means." "Had you accepted our invitation, you would have known the right way. When a man will not act where he is, he must go far to find his work." "Indeed, I have gone far and got nowhere, for I have not found my work. I left the children to learn how to serve them, and have only learned the danger they are in." "When you were with them, you were where you could help them. You left your work to look for it. It takes a wise man to know when to go away. A fool may learn to go back at once." "Do you mean, sir, I could have done something for the little ones by staying with them?" "Could you teach them anything by leaving them?" "No, but how could I teach them? I did not know how to begin. Besides, they were far ahead of me." "That is true, but you are not a rod to measure them with. Certainly, if they knew what you now know, not to say what you might have known, they would be ahead of you, out of sight ahead. But you saw they were not growing, or growing so slowly they had not yet developed the idea of growing. They were even afraid of growing. You had never seen children remain children." "But surely I had no power to make them grow." "You might have removed some of the hindrances to their growing." "What are they? I do not know them." "I did think perhaps it was want of water." Of course it is. They have none to cry with. I would gladly have kept them from requiring any for that purpose. No doubt you would, the aim of all stupid philanthropists. Why, Mr. Vane, but for the weeping in it, your world would never have become worth saving. You confess you thought it might be water they wanted. Why did you not dig them a well or two? That never entered my mind. Not when the sounds of the waters under the earth entered your ears? I believe it did once, but I was afraid of the giants for them. That was what made me bear so much from the brutes myself. Indeed, you almost taught the noble little creatures to be afraid of the stupid bags. While they fed and comforted and worshipped you, all the time you submitted to be the slave of bestial men. You gave the darlings a seeming coward for their hero. A worse wrong you could hardly have done them. They gave you their hearts. You owed them your soul. You might by this time have made the bags hewers of wood and drawers of water to the little ones. I fear what you say is true, Mr. Raven, but indeed I was afraid that more knowledge might prove an injury to them, render them less innocent, less lovely. They had given you no such reason to harbor such a fear. Is not a little knowledge a dangerous thing? That is one of the pet falsehoods of your world. Is man's greatest knowledge more than a little, or is it therefore dangerous? The fancy that knowledge is in itself a great thing would make any degree of knowledge more dangerous than any amount of ignorance. To know all things would not be greatness. At least it was for love of them, not for cowardice, that I served the giants. Granted, but you ought to have served the little ones, not the giants. You ought to have given the little ones water. Then they would have taught the giants their true position. In the meantime, you could yourself have made the giants cut down 2/3 of their coarse fruit trees to give room to the little delicate ones. You lost your chance with the lovers, Mr. Vane. You speculated about them instead of helping them. Chapter 29. The Persian Cat. I sat in silence and shame. What he said was true. I had not been a wise neighbor to the little ones. Mr. Raven resumed. You wronged them. You wronged at the same time the stupid creatures themselves. For them, slavery would have been progress. To them, a few such lessons as you have given them with a stick from one of their own trees would have been invaluable. I did not know they were cowards. What difference does that make? The man who grounds his action on another's cowardice is essentially a coward himself. I fear worse will come of it. By this time, the little ones might have been able to protect themselves from the princess, not to say the giants. They were always fit enough for that. As it was, they laughed at them. But now, through your relations with her, I hate her, I cried. Did you let her know you hated her? Again I was silent. Not even to her have you been faithful. But hush, we were followed from the fountain, I fear. No living creature did I see, except a disreputable-looking cat that bolted into the shrubbery. It was a magnificent Persian, so wet and bedraggled, though, as to look what she was, worse than disreputable. What do you mean, Mr. Raven? I cried, a fresh horror taking me by the throat. There was a beautiful blue Persian about the house, but she fled at the very sound of water. Could she have been after the goldfish? We shall see, returned the librarian. I know a little about cats of several sorts, and there is that in the room which will unmask this one, or I am mistaken in her. He rose, went to the door of the closet, brought from it the mutilated volume, and sat down again beside me. I stared at the book in his hand. It was a whole book, entire and sound. Where was the other half of it? I gasped. Sticking through into my library, he answered. I held my peace. A single question more would have been a plunge into a bottomless sea, and there might be no time. Listen, he said. I'm going to read a stanza or two. There is one present who I imagine will hardly enjoy the reading. He opened the vellum cover and turned a leaf or two. The parchment was discolored with age, and one leaf showed a dark stain over 2/3 of it. He slowly turned this also, and seemed looking for a certain passage in what appeared a continuous poem. Somewhere about the middle of the book he began to read. And we will hear Mr. Raven's poem the next time.